So I I realized I forgot something in my last video, which is actually like pushing up to GitHub. So I made this thing. It demonstrates kind of link to DB usage, and then I made another video about like how to run it. So where you need to install SQL Server Express, and then like this Northwind script and run it, and then you can finally there's steps. So you can watch that video. But this video is about uploading to GitHub. So which there's I'm sure 1,000,000,000 bajillion videos uploading to GitHub. So why bother? But here I am anyway. So I there are 1,000 ways to upload to GitHub. So my goal here isn't to demonstrate all of them. It's just to show you my workflow, which is pretty simple in my opinion. So, I have this project. Yeah, and I want to upload it to GitHub. So let me show you a couple things. We're going to go to github.com. You'll get to see my profile. Oh, big whoop. And I'm going to create a new repository, and which I did totally wrong there, but new repository. I'm going to have it match the name of the YouTube video, not the name of the folder that I currently have, and link to DB example, because that was kind of an accident. In hindsight, you might have done things differently. It's public, so you guys can see it. I'm not going to check add a README file or git ignore, or, because what I want is a blank repository. Because if you check any of these files or any of these options, if you fill them in, it'll create a repository on github.com that's not empty. And then when you try to push to it, it'll complain that there's already a commit that exists and you're like out of tree and you can't push. So then you have to do a force push. Anyway, that's probably more information than you wanted, but because I already have like the files I want to push up, I don't want to check any of these options or change any of these options. I want a blank repository. So now I have a blank repository. You can tell that it's blank because of this stuff here. Ooh, that stuff. Yeah. So anyway, now here's, you can either use HTTPS or SSH. I happen to use SSH. I'm not going to go into that, but HTTPS is definitely the easiest way to get going. If you have a GitHub account, I'm not talking about getting that started. That's easy to create, just whatever. I use SSH, so anyway. So I'm going to continue to use SSH. I also use something called Fork. So there you go. You can get it. They have 30-day free trial, and then for $50 forever, it's not a subscription. You give them $50 and you get a license forever. And it's amazing. This is really good software. Just go out and buy it. So from here, I am going to init a new repository. You can also use the command line. There's other software. There's GitHub Desktop. If you want to stay free and you're using just github.com, GitHub Desktop is a great option. If you don't just use github.com, as you know, you want to invest in some other option. And either that's the command line or VS Code or Visual Studio or Writer or, like some integration into your IDE. Or you could just buy Fork, which I would just buy Fork. Just buy Fork. Oh man, this is my brain. This is my brain. Pretty scary. So I have my link to DB example folder. I'm going to knit this folder as a new, it's got my local changes. Notice that like all of these files are included. I don't want to include all these files. So Git has this thing called a git ignore file, which is super cool. So I can right click on like a folder or file and I can say like ignore. And instead of just clicking ignore all files in obj folder, I'm going to do custom pattern. And I like doing things this way because it saves me time. So I want to ignore the obj folder and the bin folder. If it ends with a slash, it's considered a folder. If it doesn't start with a slash, it is considered any folder named obj or any folder named bin. If you have an asterisk in there, it would be any folder that ends with bin or any, but we don't want to do that. So we just want to do obj bin. We'll add that to get ignore. That won't remove all of our files that we also don't want to include this bra.json file because we don't. So we want to ignore this too. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say ignore all files that start with a hyphen. So hyphen star, that'll ignore anything that's a convention I do. Let's see, what else? Sometimes you'll see a .csproj.user file. It's actually not showing up, and then maybe that's because I'm not using Visual Studio. Maybe that's just because I use VS Code. But when you go to commit something, it's always important to review what you're committing. And you can use a template .getignore file like everybody else, or you can just provide the minimum necessary for your specific projects or your repository. And my preference is just pay attention to what you're committing. And if you can't, literally, honestly, if you can't pay attention to what you're committing, you can't be bothered by that, then you shouldn't be writing code. So just stop, give up. It's not for you. So yeah, I think we're pretty good here. I see .cs files and a solution file, a csproj file, and more CS files and a .md file. I think that's excellent. That's exactly what I want to commit. So, some people do a init for their first commit or something like that. So, whatever. It doesn't matter. I sometimes, when I'm exploring ideas, I'll just use CP, which is for checkpoint. I don't care. I just want to be able to go back in history at this point in time. So, and I don't really, it's exploratory, it's experimental. The commit message doesn't matter. In other circumstances, when I'm working on production code at work, the commit message does matter, and usually the commit message is based on the name of the issue that I'm addressing. But here, this is just for fun. I don't really care. So CP or let's go, that's fine. So I'm going to commit that, and then if I go to push, you'll see I don't have a remote. You need a remote. So I'm going to come here, add new remote. Remember just a minute ago, sorry, it's been more than a minute, I had copied this from the github.com website I was just at, where I'd created a repository. Fork recognize, it looks, if you have something on your clipboard that looks like a Git repository URL, it'll just automatically paste it in, which is really cool. And origin by convention is the default repository or the default remote of your current local repository. So anyway, I add my remote. This doesn't get into SSH keys and stuff. One of the things I like about Fork is that they make it super easy. They have this configure SSH keys. You don't have to do that. You can just use HTTPS, and that works fine too in Fork. So I would probably just use, even though I use SSH, I would probably, if you're new to this, just use HTTPS, and that's perfectly fine. And the URL just looks different. So now that I got my remote set up, I can push, and you can see now instead of being blank, I have my remote. It'll create a tracking reference. It'll push all tags. I don't need a force push because it's a blank repository, and you really don't want to force push. So now that I've pushed it up, if I go back over here and refresh, you'll see that my code's been pushed up here. And not only that, my README file that I created just looks super nice and fancy down here. So, and it's got those instructions with those links. And yeah, we can just go. yeah, so there we go. That's it. GitHub repository. Let's go.